Hello everyone, I'm Tiffany Wemmers, and I will be talking about today crime and solution analysis of the United States. Crime in the United States has become a growing problematic situation to the judicial courts and growing reoffender rates. Judicial courts have been backed up with cases which are taking too long to process and prisons that are dealing with an overflow of inmates. What could cause these statistics to rise? It could be from the individual's geographical area, the judicial court biasness, the punishment that is carried out, the financial strain on the individual, and the success of rehabilitation. Policy recommendations could help lower the reoccurrence of committing crimes and would benefit society. A cause for an influx of criminal activity and where criminals are found are geographical areas. So basically, in crime hotspots, we're going to have micro units. A micro unit is addresses, facilities, street segments, small clusters of street segments, and they usually highlight the crime hotspots. Well, micro units are infamous for their visual closeness of the block residents, interrelated role obligations, acceptance of certain common norms and behavior, common regularly recurring rhythms of activity, the physical boundaries of the street, and the historical evolution of that street segment. Now, we do see in these micro units, these crime hotspots, crime concentration. In these areas, there have elevated levels of concentration of burglaries, assaults, and domestic disturbance occurrence. So now the effects of the geographical area, specifically on juveniles, are like when a juvenile is growing up in these micro units, in these crime hotspots, they're most likely to participate in criminal activity because of the micro units and their acceptance of certain common norms and behavior. So these juveniles are actively listening to their adults that take care of them, and if those adults participate in criminal activity, therefore the children will follow in the footsteps of the saying, monkey see, monkey do. Well, the first problem with crime hotspots should be addressed with a policy recommendation to lower the criminal activity, especially in these geographical areas that are hindered by the crime. We should definitely invest in programs that teach children morals, technical skills, and provide homework help that avoids criminal activity. Children living in these crime hotspots should be given tools to understand the criminal activity that the adults in their community participate in is not right, which will give them a point of view that will actually break the crime cycle. This program will create a stable after-school life. For example, in the city of Seattle, would benefit the most from these type of programs because of the high juvenile crime rates that the city faces. Teaching children technical skills will improve their chances of having employment in higher paying jobs, especially if they can afford college. They can work in a trade school, like plumbing, for example, is an excellent option for these children to have successful lives. And then, of course, homework help would encourage the kids to participate in their school studies to eventually attend college. If they're having all this homework help, they can be passing exams, be valedictorian, and get grants and scholarships to attend a four-year college, especially something that is a goal for them. Now, the morals that could be taught from teaching acceptable society etiquette norms, they can be transitioned into the adult life as they develop because of the lack of most likely parental care, or maybe the guardian of the children do not know these social etiquettes either, and these programs will benefit the child. Now, the removal of crime hotspots is a little touchy subject, especially when it comes to developers. So like for policy recommendation for other cities that have high localized crime hotspots should create grants for developers to buy land and or property for development. In other words, it would promote gentrification. All right, and I know that's a no word, and that's what a lot of cities like to avoid, but gentrification would benefit, especially a city like Seattle. Okay, so as a local government needs economic growth and would benefit from this gentrification. Like new appealing construction will increase investment. Businesses that would not have entered the area would enter the market. Buyers of single-family homes and condominiums would lower the crime hotspot, especially with these new buyers who are able to afford the, unfortunately, higher prices of rent and mortgages. Now, the reason why it will lower crime is because the original residents would be priced out of the area, and the ones who do stay cannot continue to operate in criminal activities so openly like before. Because before, the people that lived in that area, they would, of course, not say anything to police authorities, and with the new people coming in and able to afford these prices are the citizens that the government likes, the ones that say something to law enforcement. Now, an example of like a real world gentrification that has benefited the city. So in the neighborhood of Wynwood, located in Miami, Florida, which has had a crime hotspot, which is still being developed. So a developer named Moshi Mana noticed that micro units in Wynwood contained crime hotspots and how it was affecting tourism in the tropical city of Miami. Mana's mission is to redevelop areas in the city of Miami that have been taken over by crime. For example, in 2009, he began buying this neighborhood and began to create new warehouses and apartments that would attract tourists. Mana promoted the arts into his new construction, which would later create the art district of Miami. And if you search up Wynwood, most likely the first thing to come up is Wynwood Walls, which is famous murals all over on the side of the buildings. Now, the gentrification in Wynwood has created a safe and economic growth for the city of Miami to rely on. We have art exhibits, festivals, and tourists have driven out the criminal activity out of the micro units. Therefore, gentrification is a great option for cities to participate in lowering crime in the problematic areas. Judicial court biasness, unfortunately, is still happening today. So let's define biasness. Oxford Dictionary defines bias as prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. In the judicial court, bias can appear for sentencing. For an example is 5 to incarceration time period. Now, how do judges unintentionally become biased during their verdict? All right, so in the journal, the Criminal and Labor Market Impacts of Incarceration by Mueller-Smith explains that judges display non-monotonic tendencies. These tendencies show as being hard on drugs, and easy on property offenders. For most judges in judicial court have been found that they have been consistent on the non-uniformity sentencing, and this creates an unfairness to the defendant because then their case would be judged on their characters and or traits, which influence how the case would end. In the Journal of Racial Bias in Bail Decisions, found that biasness towards race is a huge problem in the United States. Police force search on black people more than white people. Black people receive convictions of serious crimes in incarceration more than white people. And when black people are being searched in a traffic stop, found that there is no difference in average success rate of finding contraband and or illegal substances to their white counterpart. The bias exhibited at juveniles as well, which is quite concerning because when juveniles who are given stricter sentencing reduce their likelihood to graduate high school and increase the likelihood of their adult life to be in incarceration. My policy recommendation for judicial court biasness, it has to have a system in place to detect if a judge's case conclusions are being fair. You have one case that is a petty crime with a white man and a other case with a black man with the same type of petty crime, and we're going to want to have that system check, were they given the same fairness or not? For example, having two people of two different races commit the same crime, property damage, would be given the same fine and or sentencing. If the system concludes the defendants had a different fine price, then the system will request the judge to review the biasness, and this system would benefit, county-wide to statewide and federal to, Supreme Court, just to make sure that everyone is having a fair judgment call on them. Punishment from the judicial court has carried out for decades, and punishment has ranged from paying fines, electronic monitoring, to diversion agreements, to name a few of the many kinds of punishment there are in the court system. The goal of the court is to lower the rate of reoffenders, and using these ranges that I've chosen as punishment has lowered the crime rate, but also improves rehabilitation. Now, fines. Defendants are at the times given fines instead of a serving sentence. The fines are mostly issued to petty crimes. For example, a petty crime could range from traffic offense, shoplifting, to disorderly conduct. Most defendants would rather pay the fine than be sent to jail. This method does encourage more criminal activity because the criminal would have no fear of committing the crime because they're able to pay the fine, themselves out of the predicament. Another option is electronic monitoring. Electronic monitoring has been given, convicted felons a second chance of freedom by being given a ankle or a wrist device. Felons can be given these devices to not serve their sentence in prison and can be used for the probation period. These monitors are a physical deterrent of continuing to participate in criminal activity because of the global positioning system, GPS tracker, embedded in them. The fear of being caught with the use of this device has shown that it lowers the likelihood of the criminal participating in the criminal activity. Especially it helps the criminal to avoid areas that are, the hot spots, the micro units, because the court can say, okay, you can only be on these streets in this area at these times, like a curfew. They can say you can go your home to work, grocery store, and that's it. So it does give a sense of freedom and also deters from the criminal activity, because criminal activity would have to be in areas that the judge said, no, you can't go to. Now, diversion agreements, they're a fantastic way for courts to avoid the cost of holding the case, because defendants has deferred adjudication of guilt. So they have pled guilty, to receive this agreement. For the defendant that also avoids the formal felony conviction are participating in, community supervision that operates like a felony probation. So in the paper Diversion in the Criminal Justice System by Mueller explains that this is a form of punishment that benefits individual behavioral outcomes. When the defendant is given work in this program and completes it successfully, they can find employment in industries less likely to hire people with criminal records. For example, if they work in a steel factory and the court says you're going to work at a steel factory for your agreement, and once the probation is over, they could find work in the steel factory, in that steel factory, or another steel factory in another area, because they have taken the skills from the agreement, and it would benefit them, most definitely. The financial impact of imprisonment is detrimental to the prisoner. The cost of staying in prison affects the financial standing of the inmate. A criminal, when outside of prison, participating in criminal activity would make more income participating in illegal activity than by legal means. If the ex-convict were to initiate back into criminal activity again, the money would be the total of what the person thinks jail time would cost. Again, this behavior shows that the individual is not risk adverse. But for the risk adverse criminals, use the probability of being caught and or of what type of punishment is given. In criminal discount factors and deterrence exhibited that criminals discount their futures based on the sentencing length. For example, a quote from the reading is, increasing in sentences length, either mandatory minimum sentence enhancements or more severe sentencing, are unlikely to have much deterrent effect when the baseline sentence is already long and the criminal will still continue in the activity unless the sentencing of the first crime, the original crime, was the baseline lower, and continue to participating would add another 20 years or 10 years would definitely deter them from continuing. Rehabilitation. The main goal of the judicial court is to have post-release inmates rehabilitate into society without falling back into their old criminal activity. Although there is a large probability for criminals to recommit the same type of crime activity, that's what happens for them. An example that encourages criminals to deter away from going to criminal activity is age, marital status, and a number of children in the household. When they're back in their family household, they are then again the provider of the home. They will stay away from criminal activity because of the risk aversion would create a sense of fear because of the fear of being away from their household and not being able to provide financially in prison. So rehabilitation is a main concern, and criminals should, try their best to rehabilitate back into society to be a provider. In conclusion, an individual's geographical area, judicial court biasness, punishment, and financial strain on the individual affect sentencing and rehabilitation rates. The policy recommendations would addresses like geographical areas and improve them with gentrification grants, judicial court bias system, and the investment and use of electronic monitoring. These policy recommendations could help lower the reoccurrence of committing crime and would benefit all of society. Thank you for listening to my talk, and hopefully I'll post a other video. Thank you.